Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where this week, until Sunday, November the 7th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, you can get 15% off all promotional cards at StarCityGames.com/sale. So that's pre-release foils, game day foils, judge foils, those D&D ampersand foils from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, those darkened San Diego Comic-Con Planeswalkers that were all the rage a few years ago. Any and all of that can be yours with 15% off at StarCityGames.com/sale.
What's up, gamers? Ryan Overturf here to remind you to check out the 540, Star City Games' very own Cube podcast, where every week myself and Justin Parnell will be tackling topics regarding all things Cube Draft. We're talking set reviews, digital Cube retrospectives, archetype breakdowns, tons of tips on both how to design your own cube as well as play other people's cubes, with plenty of nonsense interspersed. If you're into Cube Draft, we would love it if you gave us a listen, and if you're not, maybe we can fix that. Check out the 540 every week right here on StarCityGames.com and wherever you find your podcasts.
This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, your first stop for Magic the Gathering inspired stylings. Visit coalesceapparel.shop to pick up a t-shirt inspired by fan-favorite Magic personalities, a hoodie from your favorite guild in the Ravnica University line, or just signal your intent to snap Keep in the Dark with an anti-Mulligan Mulligan Club sticker. Want to splash up a Commander deck? Check out the Keeping It 100 sticker line and see if your favorite commander shows up there. Whatever you order, use code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your purchase at coalesceapparel.shop. Coalesce Apparel. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey. I'm here with Arilax, and they say that by the time a podcast turns 30, it should have its own Patreon, its own sponsors, and really be getting along in the world. And we have none of that, so we're lagging behind in our development here.
Yeah, you know, it's a podcast. It takes a little while to launch. Sometimes it gotta stay at home. Do whatever it does for the first little bit, and it'll get on its way.
And we have a lot of results to get to today. So not only the usual weekend challenges on Magic Online, but SCG CON featuring the Invitational, I believe is the proper branding. We had a pair of Modern Opens run by Face to Face here in Toronto this past weekend. So a lot of stuff to sink our teeth into. And let's start with the Invitational, because that's the one we were all on the edge of our seats for. Sadly, no ability to watch along at home, but certainly following along at home, seeing how all of our friends were doing there. And I think the big headline story, which you need to be careful about interpreting the data, because it is this mixed format event, and I think in the initial posted results, some of the top 8 results were mixed in with both the top standard records and the top modern records, so you have to disentangle all of that. But once you see through the fog, the story is the two undefeated players in this tournament, Maxwell Palcian and Shaheen Surani, Star City's own, both playing Azorius Control. So a very fantastic weekend for that deck above anything else.
Yeah, and also of note, Peter Ingram, I believe, with a 6-2 or 6-1-1 record. I compiled it out earlier, but another great modern record showing up in the top 8. The only thing I'll mention is that I love the fact that Peter just took his Shark Typhoons and threw them in the garbage. I think that card is bad. I actually might have a Jarvis message of a transcript from Peter just being like, is this card even good? Why is this in the deck?
Well, I think the answer with these results in mind might be getting an edge in the mirror. Unclear if it actually does that in a better way than other cards you could put in those slots, but it might be this self-fulfilling prophecy where if you think Blue-Eye Control is the best deck, then you need some way to get an edge there, and maybe you have to make that sacrifice.
Maybe. It does look a little weird against Archmage's Charm, but that is a card that you kind of want to clear out of their hand anyways, and it's not the worst lineup in the world.
Yeah, and that's the virtue of Archmage's Charm, right? Is it basically always does something good, and so either it's going to be a divination or a cancel in this eventual counterfight, or it's going to steal your Shark, and none of those is ideal exactly, so you just have to play through it somehow.
Yeah, Shaheen showing up with one Castle Ardenvale, which I don't believe I've seen in these lists recently too, so he's really trying to win the mirror with 2 Shark Typhoons and an Ardenvale.
Yeah, I like the Castle Ardenvale a lot. it does seem a little suspicious in the deck that's trying to cast Counterspell and Archmage's Charm, but that's what the full 4 copies of Mystic Gate in many of these lists goes a long way in setting up.
Wait, I don't think Mystic Gate sets up Castle Ardenvale. It's not a Plains.
Well, no, I mean just
yeah.
you have your Castle Ardenvale, and you really need to cast these triple blue cards, and so something has to give there. But these are some load-bearing Mystic Gates, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, Shaheen never a huge fan of casting spells on turn 1 with his lands, so I think he can get away with that.
Yeah, he's the expensive sorcery master for a reason, right?
Yeah. Moving past those, we do see a bit of contesting Azorius here with Kellen Pastor with the Kane Reinhardt 4-color blink list in 6th place. Basically, as far as I can tell from him, just totally stock, nothing too crazy going on. And let's see what else. We have, another couple decks we can kind of expect. Cameron Sullivan, Oppo MTG with the Zoomer Murktide deck. We've got an Orzhov Hammer in the top 8, which is, just a good deck. And then should we talk about some Grixis? Because multiple Grixis decks made this top 8.
Yeah, and it's multiple different Grixis decks effectively, right?
Yeah, I mean, really it's like 4 Death Shadow in one and like some Cling to Dust in the other, but yeah.
Yeah, let's focus on the Death Shadow build that Corey Baumeister, our champion, and who better to take the tournament down than Star City's own and Roanoke's own Corey Baumeister. He gets to take the trophy 10 minutes down the road and put it in his trophy case, which is already pretty full, I have to think, before COVID, and now it's just popping off even further. But his weapon of choice for the modern rounds was Grixis Death Shadow, and we had Brad also in the top 8 of this tournament with Zuma Jund, and boomer though Brad is, I know that he's willing to take input, especially on Modern, from a variety of sources, and I have to think as soon as he saw this Zuma Jund deck, he fell in love with it. Interestingly though, the two of them were not exactly on the same page in terms of deck selection there. I think they certainly were more so for Standard, but in Modern, these decks are 2 peas in the same pod, but I think the differences there do actually matter quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a statement by Corey that he expected less Azorius than you would think, even though it was probably one of the most winning decks. I believe there was like a tweet, Andrea Mengucci doing his morning Modern League rounds, and he was just like, great deck, Azorius is an unwinnable matchup. And I think that's kind of what happened to this deck, was it started popping off right about when people started adding Solitudes to Azorius, and then that was a problem. But if you expect less Azorius, if you expect people to be more choked up by like not wanting to play Control into 50-minute round clocks, or like not wanting to find copies of Solitude, then yeah, this deck seems like it's a notably better choice. I
get the sense that isn't what was going on here. I think Corey expected a room full of blue-eye Control, and he said that, even though I walk through the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Come at me with your Solitudes and everything else. And he was okay with that. And there was some Twitter exchange earlier where Corey said he had some absurdly good win rate against blue-eye Control in testing with this deck. And at that point, if this is meant to be the bad matchup that's keeping you away, and the deck has a lot of things going for it otherwise, then if you have solved what is meant to be the problem, then embrace it and run with it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Versus Live has Corey playing against Ross's Azorius Control this week. At the very least, if Ross manages to win on the Azorius side, he might make Corey put all the marbles into the cup and spill it on the table. But
yeah, I think if Ross beats Corey there, he gets to take the trophy and also take it back to wherever Ross lives in Roanoke.
I think that would only apply if Ross was in or near the top 8.
Oh, yeah. Hadn't thought about that. But never mind. Hopefully there will be more invitationals in the future to rebalance the scoreboard there.
Yeah, absolutely. Ross can maybe get away with some monocolor aggro decks in the future. Only got that in one format this time, probably. Might have been an issue, but, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah,
so
I'm very intrigued to see if... does this officially mark the end of 2020 Season 1? Because are we going to get that leaderboard that's been frozen in Aspect on the Star City website for the past 18 months? Is that going to have any turnover now? Or is Zach Allen going to be the Season 1 points leader for another year to come?
That's my current hope. I would love for him just to kind of be hiding away in the corner, just like, no one can take this from me, even though it's buried away and obsolete. It'll just be frozen in time.
We did also have a PCQ taking place at SCG CON. That was won by Orzhov Hammer in the hands of Kenneth Oswald. What seems to be the stock-ish list now with Main Deck Out Confident, which is also to jump ahead a little bit. So at Main Deck Thoughtseize, we saw Nico Boni, Shere Khan, absolute terror on Magic Online, very deserving champion there. That was his weapon of choice to win that tournament, going 4-0 in the modern portion effectively there, and picking up a W here in the PCQ. Some other notable stuff from that top 8, though. We have Infect of the black-green variety making an appearance here in the hands of Jacob Siegel. I thought this one might be worth talking about.
Yeah, Phyrexian Crusader, I think that I'm willing to believe that that is absolutely correct in this era. If the format has moved in a direction towards interaction being prominent in every single deck, you can no longer really rely on Infect being this kind of surgical tool. Like, you show up with Infect when your opponents are going to play Amulet and Ironworks, and then you just kill them with Blighted Agent. It's like, no, that's not really what's going on. Everyone has Prismatic Ending. So if everyone has Prismatic Ending, then you may as well have these cards that have protection from Prismatic.
Yeah, we saw Hammer players pick up at first Knight of Infamy and then Knight of Malice en masse as a way to fight Solitude and Prismatic Ending and a bunch of the other white removal. And there's still a fair amount of Unholy Heat and Fury and Lightning Bolt in the format. And at that point, Phyrexian Crusader starts to look completely untouchable. It is the perfect threat that you could ask for there.
Yeah, I think that also one of the previous issues with the card was that Fatal Push was so big, and with black spells kind of being pushed out of the format, it's just like, are you going to kill it with a green or blue spell? I don't think that's how that works.
Weirdly enough, this might be the remaining Fatal Push deck in the format. We have 2 copies here in the main deck, 2 more on the sideboard, and same split there for Thoughtseize too. So weirdly enough, this is the black interactive mid-range deck that can suddenly pivot into killing you out of nowhere.
Well, I wonder if it lost in the top 8 to the Demir Mill player, which is the other Fatal Push deck.
That sounds plausible to me. We do have 4 copies of Veil of Summer in the sideboard and 3 Endurance, which you think would set this deck up quite nicely against Mill, but who knows?
Yeah, the Veil of Summer versus Mill is kind of a problem. People have not played a lot of that card, but it is pretty good in the matchup.
Yeah, I want to talk about Gemrazor quickly. We have 2 copies of that one in the creature suite here, and I think that's kind of an inspired choice in a format where, first of all, there's a ton of Chalice of the Void, and you need a main deckable way to kill that. And so this is a pump spell that, conveniently enough, blows up not only Chalice, but also Urza Saga or really anything else from the Hammer decks. Amulet is making a minor resurgence, very good against that deck as well. And just in general, there's a lot of random artifacts and enchantments running around. Spreading Seas, I can see being an issue for this deck. And so Gemrazor just kind of does it all there. And then even if no obvious target presents itself, yeah, sometimes you just make your Glistener Elf into a permanent 4/4 and get to work.
Yeah, no, I really like Gemrazor here, and I like being able to give Infect a proactive interaction spell. It kind of lets it play the same game that everyone else is playing, which I think is pretty important. I think one reason you didn't see Gemrazor in previous versions of Infect was it did clash a little bit with Noble Hierarch. Doesn't clash so much with Ignoble Hierarch, which is, I think the printing of that was the main reason to revisit Black-Green Infect initially with MH2 before we saw how the rest of the format was going to shake out. Now that I think Phyrexian Crusader is the main draw, having Ignoble Hierarch as your bridge to that card, which fixes a somewhat clunky mana base in this deck, and then also sometimes you need to kill them with regular damage, right? So you can just suit up your Ignoble Hierarch and get busy there too. Yeah, it does happen. It's I guess your Gemrazor is kind of your Rancor. I remember it being a lot easier when you could put Rancor on your Noble Hierarchs, and Gemrazor is like 2 Rancors in 1. So yeah, that makes sense.
I wonder if those non-poison manual kills are a little more common here between those lines, and then also the Endurances in the sideboard. That card is just kind of big on top of everything else it does for you, and I can definitely imagine games where you go turn 1 Hierarch into turn 2 Endurance, and then if your opponent is a little careless with their own life total because they don't expect to need to care about that against an Infect deck, then they're only 1 or 2 attacks, 1 or 2 pump spells away from getting in lethal range.
Yeah, I would expect that to kind of happen against, especially with like stretching to the third color in a lot of these decks. You know, we talked about the Jeskai Murktide deck. I think that life totals, at least for the first bit of the format, you know, with all the Urza Sagas and Spire Bluff Canals, were a little bit cushier, but we're starting to push back into the point where, you know, a 4/4 endurance clocks people out in like 3 turns with some pump spells as opposed to, you know, a full 4 or some other obnoxious number.
Yeah, I also wonder if with Hammer still being, I would say, the best deck in the format, has maintained its popularity over time, this seems to fit that initial recipe that we identified for beating that deck, where you want to be this fast, proactive deck that can beat Hammer straight up in a race, but then also have access to some of the premium disruption in the format. So here we mentioned Fatal Push already, Gem Razor being a pump spell, kill your thing against Hammer. And then also you can be a Force of Vigor deck if you want to. We only see 2 copies in the sideboard here, but if you really want to put the hammer on them, so to speak, then you could dial that up even further too.
Yeah, and you also get to use Vines of Vastwood as an interactive spell against them in the old twin magic. You know, like when they flash in their hammer and they're like, I will target my Inkmoth Nexus. We know this trick from the Splinter Twin days. That's not going to happen.
I wonder how well this lines up against a deck like Team of Crashcade as well, where I think that deck is hamstrung by sometimes you don't beat the board, and then all of your interaction is inherently a little bit clunky. And so a deck like this, which is very good at obsoleting what's on the battlefield, and then also beating people who show up with not enough removal or their removal is too expensive, it feels like you have them covered on both axes there.
That makes sense. Also worth noting, a lot of the Temur Crashcade interaction that would be cheap is blue. I think the only reason I would be a little concerned about that matchup is they just have this crazy density of interaction. And like, I'm looking at the current list with like 4 Brazen Borrowers and like Force Negations. They might just be able to run you down on cards, but it's the kind of thing I would have to play because you are making some good points. I will also caution that like, this is a deck that is bad against Blood Moon, and they become a pretty good Blood Moon deck after sideboard. That's
rough. Yeah, I do have to watch out for that for sure. The rest of this top 8, we have a copy of the Jeskai. They've called it Jeskai Midrange for lack of a better term, I suppose. This is kind of similar to what Talisker won the challenge with not long ago. Just Esper Sentinel, Stoneforge Mystic, Ragavan, Fury, for main deck Blood Moon, making a really bold but also correct statement, I think, about that card's positioning in the format. We have the chalices in the sideboard here I see now, along with the usual hate suite of Rest in Peace, Flusterstorm, so on and so forth. We have Jeskai Control in the hands of Robert Sader, who, if you know the name Robert Sader, that will come as no surprise. A copy of Burn, the mill deck that you mentioned, 4-color Yorion, and then in the hands of Matthew Comeau, finally, we have 4-color Creativity, and you hear that and you think, all right, this is Sarah's Emissary and Emrakul, the Eonosol, and stuff like that, maybe a throwback to Velomachus. This is actually the 4 Primeval Titan build of the deck that we've seen pop up from time to time, and built a little differently there too. So this deck has a higher land count, which I guess is kind of priced in once you need to put Valakut in your deck. But then we have Explore as our ramp spell of choice, less of a focus on Renin 6. We've got main deck Sunset Reverie, which shows a lot of respect for Burn, which I think is right to do in the format right now, and also right for this deck. I think Burn is a pretty challenging matchup. Further respect with 4 copies of Blossoming Calm and some Ether Gusts in the sideboard there. And so a new take on an already somewhat obscure archetype at this point.
Yeah, I think the Sunset Revelries are a pretty big innovation here because they're not just this anti-burn, anti-aggro block. 2 tokens is your combo setup. So it is a combo piece that is also pretty powerful interaction, which is really impressive.
Yeah, I think this build, whether intentionally or accidentally, ends up solving a lot of the issues that I had with the classic Creativity deck, where you do actually have a higher land count now, and that was always a sticking point for me before. And you have a plan that isn't wholly dependent on finding and resolving Creativity, because sometimes if you have enough removal and ramp and so on, your opponent isn't applying much pressure, you just get up to Primeval Titan, and as we've seen so many times in the past, once the first Primeval Titan resolves, sure, it can die, whatever, but then, especially in a dedicated Valakut deck, that trigger is all you need. The damage has been done by that point.
Yeah, and There's also this nice little overlap on Explore, because Explore is pushing you closer to that Indomitable Creativity 4 or 5 mana already. And like, that's just how you get the Titan. It's just doing the, like, you have two like sort of expensive win conditions, but one is like notably a tier down with more setup. And you kind of get the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, so do like this build of the deck a lot. Keen to try it out at some point myself. I think that does it for all of the SCG CON and SCG CON adjacent tournaments we had. Do we want to stay in the paper realm for the time being here?
Yeah, let's stay there, because I know this is probably your chance to talk about some fun stuff, because you were at some paper event this weekend.
Yeah, I was not actually in these opens or doing much winning on that front at least, but got to see what was doing well. And the Saturday face-to-face open here in Toronto had, I think, either 7 or 8 different decks in the top 8 here as I consult my list. So Matthew Dilks back on form here with Hammer. That's his new jam, losing to Grixis in the finals. And then the rest of the top 8 rounded out by, is it Murktide, Living End, Burn, John Saga, 4-color Reclamation, a deck that I wish we had a list to hand for, because that has certainly piqued my interest. And then Mana Symbol, who we've mentioned a few times before, with 4-color Creativity. And I saw him playing a lot of his matches through the weekend. He mentioned that this kind of mid-range Planeswalker split that a lot of these lists are moving towards, with Jace the Mind Sculptor, Nahiri the Harbinger, both of those cards were excellent, but in particular, Nahiri really overperformed for him. And that made sense to me in this context, but it also got me thinking about trying to find a home for that card in some of these 4-color piles, where having a fast, not just game time wise, but round time wise, win condition goes a long way, I think. And it's resistant to a lot of the interaction that people are playing, where, you know, of course, it can't be solituded, and then its loyalty is high enough that one Fury doesn't get the job done. And it is another expensive card in a somewhat clunky deck at times, but when that card pitches to both Fury and Solitude, you have this buyout whenever it is clunking up your hand.
Yeah, and it's also like a pretty nice removal spell for Urza Saga in a deck that doesn't really get to play Spreading Seas the way the Azorius or other 4-color decks do.
Yeah, I have been seeing a lot of lists of the 4-color decks just playing Spreading Seas, and I think that is semi-popular at this point. But also having a good out 2 Blood Moon, where just fetching your basic planes means Nahiri can kill that and then unlock all of your lands. And as you say, Urza Saga, one of the few cards in the format that can really outgrind this deck or threaten it on that axis by itself. Just being able to pick that one off cleanly, and Sigarda's too, against the most popular Saga deck. That sounds really nice to me.
Yeah, when I played the 4-color decks earlier on, I definitely sideboarded Nahiri out a lot, but I had a lot of respect for like the range that it offered, and it just is like the kind of thing where sometimes it'll just be like very clear that you do not want this inefficient Planeswalker that dies on the spot to Unholy Heat, but like a decent amount of the time you want this flexible card advantage engine that like threatens to kill them and also cleans some stuff up.
Yeah, and so on the Sunday here, we had a lot of the usual suspects in the top 8. Copy of Hammer, copy of Jeskai Control. We had a new kid on the block winning the whole thing here, and this is the 80-card 4-color Crashcade deck, which Doomwake pioneered, I think initially as a joke, as a gimmick, but as all the best jokes end up being, it became serious by the time we got to the punchline.
Yeah, so do you want to talk a bit about this deck? Because yeah. I can't, for the life of me, I cannot process why it is better than just playing a smaller Rhinos deck that's more consistent.
So I think Solitude actually is a somewhat big draw to this deck. The reason being that we mentioned one of the main vulnerabilities of the Teemo Crashgate deck, the smaller version, is just dealing with big stuff is sometimes a problem. So Murktide Region is famously an issue for that deck. Urza Saga is an issue because sometimes the constructs are just bigger than your Rhinos, and so you need to solve that problem. And so a lot of your other removal is either temporary or conditional or cares about sizing in some way. Solitude doesn't. It gets the thing out of there and clears the ground for your Rhinos to attack. And then as a line of defense against Hammer, I think it offers something specific and unique that you get like Force of Vigor and such post sideboarding if you want it. But as a main deck card, I think it does go a long way there as well. Teferi Time Raveler, a perfect card in any of these Crashcade or Living End matchups, of course. And then also one of the better tools you can have against the grindy decks, especially when they have Counterspell, Archmage's Charm, even Dovin's Veto, Flusterstorm after sideboarding, and so on and so forth. Teferi also kind of doubling up with Solitude as an answer to stuff like Motide Region or Big Constructs. So I think the White Splash has a lot going for it there. And we mentioned a while back that it seemed to be every weekend in one of the challenges. Doomwake would top 8 with Team of Crashcade featuring some new card that was the new hotness for the deck and that people quickly picked up. And he was really kind of leading the format through the evolution of this deck. And now Doomwake has another 20 cards and another color to play with. So God only knows where it's going from here.
It is hard to... Weirdly, like the Yorion decks kind of add a lot of the same cards to kind of maximize the value of Yorion. But at the same time, like, there is just this inherent flexibility of just like, I don't know, I'm going to play these cards today. And I'm interested to see what happens with this deck going forward, because your argument about Solitude being really good makes a lot of sense. The best part of these Cascade decks is more free cards than everyone else, and it's another good free card.
Yeah, this is not a Yorion deck so much as you kind of wanted to take it this direction anyway, and sometimes you get to pay 3 mana to buy a white card to pitch through your Solitude in a deck which you have Ardent Plea, you have Teferi, but beyond that, I guess Omnath now can join the roster as well. That, in theory, gives you a decent fair plan. I don't know how often that materializes in practice. If there's a Chalice or a Teferi that you can't deal with yourself, I don't know how often Omnath in a otherwise clunky draw actually gets you across the finish line there, but it's something. It's a theoretical out, at least.
Yeah, I mean, the deck was already pretty good at cleaning things up when they like had a Teferi or a Chalice on the battlefield unanswered. Like, I don't know how much better this kind of backup stuff is than like just casting Bone Crusher Giant or playing Brazen Borrower or whatever. So I don't know how much that necessarily adds to the deck, but like it is pretty good to have your own Teferis to like have a different setup other than just like, well, I'm going to end a turn cast Violent Outburst, and that is how I have to fight their counterspells.
Mm-hmm. The white cards do also give you some new tools against the format at large. So against Burn, for example, Timely Reinforcements, which mostly you would want to upgrade to Sunset Reverie, but that interferes with your Cascade, so that is highly illegal here. But also Night of Autumn, which was a really smart innovation the more I thought about it, where, against Burn, it's a body that gains you 4 life, can't do much better than that. Against the control decks, this is a main deckable answer to Chalice that also applies pressure, so can help to attack down a Teferi, for example. And then also, great card against Hammer, for instance. And that buyout clause of 3 mana 4/3, that's kind of what Bone Crusher Giant is in a lot of spots anyway. And so when you look at it through that lens, this card actually has quite a bit going for it.
Yeah, that was the exact comparison I was going to make. It's like, often against these Azorius decks, I would like, I don't want to say like a ton of the time, but 15% of the time, you just wouldn't even cast Stomp because you wouldn't want to get your Bone Crusher Giant forced or Dovin's vetoed. You would just cast this stupid 4/3 and hope it hits them. And it sounds like Knight is also a 4/3, which, carry the 1. And yeah, that checks out.
It did make me wonder which other Cascade decks could go down the same route of expanding, but then because you get Ardent Plea, you have just as consistent access to your Cascade effects while also getting this other stuff. So I have some thoughts in the pipeline there. But for now, this deck is racking up more and more actual results. And I still think on balance, if you force me to pick one of the two, I would pick just regular old Team of Crashcade. But I think you do have those two branching paths to choose between now.
Yeah, I'm gonna nip the 80 card Living Hand in the bud here, though. I think that with that deck, it is important that the endpoint of all of your Cascades like maximizes itself at like the most efficient cards and exactly your Shardless Agent stuff. So I think that adding anything to your, like, you would just be putting more cyclers into your deck because it means that you're less likely to draw actual Living End. I don't think you get a ton of value out of it, but if you had a different cast, or were you into like Glimpse of Tomorrows with 80 cards? I could listen to that. Okay.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that, but need to actually put that into practice first and hopefully earn a reason to talk about it here instead of just vomiting the contents of my brain out into the ether. But in any case, 4-color Rhinos making a name for itself. I know Doomwake is setting his sights on the CFB Vegas event in a few weeks and has been streaming a lot of the Your Rhinos, I think is the name du jour testing for that. So interested to see how all of that develops. Let's log on, Ari. Let's go online here for these weekend challenges.
Yeah, well, let's start with the headliner event again. We started with the Invitational, so we should start with the MOCS. And I think we can take this one pretty fast because it's one 8-player queue. Someone's going to 3-0. It's 3 rounds. Like, it's really noisy. I think it's just worth looking at the event and looking at the decks and just thinking about like what the players playing for the highest stakes against the other players they expect to have prepared for the format are thinking. And the answer is no Azorius control. And someone has actually like re-leveled and thought that no one else would show up with Azorius, so they played Living End.
Yeah, which I kind of respect. I seem to remember this player, Alexander Ivanov, in a previous mocks also making some fairly off-the-wall deck choices. And so they have a somewhat proven history with this approach. And yeah, we can't extrapolate too much here, but you do have this leveling war going on, which is interesting to unpack from the outside, even if it doesn't tell you much actionable advice for yourself.
Yeah, maybe you can kind of see into the future a week or two and try and figure out where that's going. But yeah, let's hop on down then and we can talk about the challenges, the typical weekly fare before we get into our main topic.
Yeah, so let's start on Saturday here, where, as always, whenever it is pronounced, the death of Ismurtide has been greatly exaggerated here. Yeah,
it's back. It's just Izzet. My understanding is that there was a Izzet consortium working on a bunch of lists. They tried some stuff that we might get to later, and then they just came back around to like, we're just going to play the linear good version of this deck, and if we play against Azorius, we play against Azorius, and we still got outs.
I don't know how much coordination there was between the various Ismurtide players in this top 8. There are some interesting one-offs popping up. We've got a Royal Scions showing up in the 5th place list, along with a Jace Prodigy, and then some other, minor variations, some fun-of one-offs, Brazen Borrower, Engineered Explosives, the one Force Negation in Doom Switch's winning list, just keeping people honest. You kind of see my shields are down. How dare you?
Yeah, I like the cards in Doom Switch's list because I think that the core problem is addressing Chalice of the Void. And if you can address that, you can kind of compete with the Azorius decks card for card. Like if you just stick enough expressive iterations and, don't let them stick it to Fairy, you can end up in some pretty good shape. So having your one-ofs be like Brazen Borrower, Engineered Explosives, Force Negation to kind of fight that fight seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess at some point we should get to the non-multi decks, however many of those there are in this top 8 here.
Yeah, I mean, Amulet Titan is exciting. I like we're back to Abundant Harvest in our virtually 36 land deck.
I don't know if we're back to Abundant Harvest so much as Big JC 0-0, a long-time Amulet player. I don't think they ever left. I think they haven't played that much Magic recently, and they took their list from 3 months ago, and because they know the deck inside and out, and I think it, for the reasons we gave last week, is a little better position than it has been in a while. I think they were able to just run that up into yet another decent finish. Yeah.
Moving down the list, we've got Zoomer Mill, which is the same Mill deck that everyone plays because it's just Mill, but a Zoomer played it.
Okay.
Not a lot to say about that. I like Mill. People should give it a little more respect, but they won't, and that's fine. And we got Grixis Shadow showing up, same thing as the Invitational. Some 4-color, what we'd expect. And then in 8th place, we have Ed D'Amico yet again, Yawgmothing away. I don't really see, the one flex slot has become a Thoughtseize this week instead of an Endurance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the best card counts to highlight the direction in which he is taking this deck is 3 copies of Grist in the main deck and only 1 copy of Giraffe's Messenger.
Yeah, I think Grist is kind of playing to the, everyone needs to have interaction. That is this deck's version of interaction. It's pretty good. I mean, with the fact that you have so many mana dorks, it's totally fine to play this card as like Maelstrom Pulse. And it's Maelstrom Pulse with upside. Making the tokens really does help with Quarter Calling. I have had some really weird stuff pop up with Grist. I don't want to list the full set of like things that happen because Grist is a creature in other zones. It's just the kind of thing that like something will happen in a game and it will usually be good for you. And then you can kind of just like, oh, that's neat. And then it just goes in the book and you'll forget about it. And then it'll just happen again later. It's fine.
I wonder if Ed got anyone with Scavenging Ooze eating his own grist.
Ooh, that's a cute one. That's a cute one. We might want to take a second to talk about like the general power level of this deck, because I think that I like this deck for these like somewhat shorter events, like challenges. But I think some of my wariness about it comes from like the Grand Prix pedigree, where like you get to round 12 and your opponent should just like have decks that are good. And like, I think that, I mean, not to say that everyone else isn't playing a good deck, but this just feels like the kind of deck where like you start a Grand Prix 8-1 like every time, and then you finish the tournament like 10 or 11-4 or 10-5. I don't know how to describe that, but it's like powerful, but like not flexible, and things just do sort of happen to you sometimes.
Yeah, I think it is easy to get moderned with this deck, and this was my reservation about it before, which was that even when it seemed like it should be good in a given matchup, or your opening hand was good for the deck, or it was one that you felt like you were priced into keeping because if you're sending this back, then the whole deck has a structural flaw. Even with those hands, things could all just fall apart sometimes and go horribly wrong. And I don't think there's a way to fix that, although some of these innovations are pushing it in that direction. So sometimes Geralf's Messenger is a good fair card. Sometimes you draw your basic forest or your Dryad Arbor and your Messenger, and your Birds of Paradise falls in a light breeze to a Lava Dart or something, and you just never cast a spell the entire game. I think this list is kind of more stable and more balanced across the board. So I like the direction this is going, but some of those fundamental issues just can't really be addressed, I think.
Yeah, that's not to say you shouldn't play it if it's your jam. Like, go ahead, do it. Just like be aware that you are. I would not sit down for an event with this deck and be like, yeah, I figured it all out this weekend and I'm going to crush everybody and they're going to have no chance. It's just gonna be like, yeah, my deck's good and we're going to play some Magic and see what happens.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be said just in the abstract for a fast-ish consistent combo deck which has 8 tutors for specific hate cards. So yeah, sometimes you get to find the one Outland Liberator in the sideboard, or the one Scavenging Ooze against some graveyard-based combo deck or something, and you actually have decently consistent access to all of that. Worth noting some of those targets that are popping up again now. So we see Obstinate Baloth again in the sideboard, which you really do need a high impact target against burn, especially when the main combo that your deck is named around involves losing life, and often you can't close in a single turn, so they just untap and cast their Boros Charm or something. I think past a certain point, your main plan is just turtle up behind Obstinate Baloth, and we've got a second copy of Scavenging Ooze in the sideboard, which can kind of work towards that same plan as well. And then also one copy of Thrun the Last Troll. And against these highly interactive, grindy Solitude decks, especially blue-white, this card is an absolute beating, as we identified before. And so I don't know how easy it is necessarily to evolution or Court of Calling for that thing against the kind of interaction that it's good against. But I guess sometimes you just draw it too, and it's pretty insane then.
Yeah, Thrun makes sense. I want to shout out Outland Liberator. Just like the amount it is better than the next best version of that card is just so much. The specific interaction that like I hadn't really thought about until it happened was that it is so good against Urza Saga. Because of the way Night Day works, it's only trigger. It's not like the old werewolves, right? They have to cast the spell, which means that there's like this really good window where like the first turn or even the second turn that Saga's going to go off, they're usually in a spot where they're incentivized to use all their mana on Saga and not necessarily cast a spell. So you're in this perfect spot to end of turn, cord up the Liberator. It transforms on your turn, and you just have to eat something for free and then still have the sacrifice up. Yeah, because of the night side trigger. Yeah,
that is really nice, and it's kind of tough to think through the sequencing there. But like once you see it happen for the first time, you're like, oh wow, that's really good.
Yeah. So yeah, Yawgmoth's good. In general, I think the deck is pretty good against Hammer. I had heard that when I made some comments about it a few weeks ago on the pod, like not really understanding its place in the metagame, and someone was like, "Yeah, the Hammer matchup is really good." it's really good because they just can't kill Yawgmoth efficiently, and then their deck also can't beat Yawgmoth. It's really, that's all it comes down to. So yeah, if you're going to play against a lot of Hammer, I think that that's a really good choice. But I don't really know what else it's like getting a major edge against, but it's good enough.
Yeah, I do think that Hammer is very good at beating decks that can legitimately claim to have a good matchup against it, just because your best draws are so ridiculous and your cards are so efficient and you really punish anyone for stumbling. Likewise, Yawgmoth can be a somewhat clunky and inefficient deck at times. And so on that axis, you will lose more games than it feels like you should to Hammer, I expect. But like if you have the time and things go right for you, I think your plan lines up very well against what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and you also just have like Force of Vigor. So you have a lot of tools, but yeah, things can fall apart. On that note of Hammer, let's talk about this Sunday challenge, because we got a Hammer winner of a slightly different kind.
Yeah, Crusherbot BG, living up to their name here. This is the one person flying the flag for this Lurrus-less build of Hammer with a bunch of swords and Nettlecyst and so on and so forth. And when I first saw that they had won the challenge, it was Bamsing, who is a godsend in terms of giving us these results week in, week out. So another shout out to them. And they had tagged the Twitter handle of the person, which is just their actual name. So I didn't realize this was Crusherbot. I thought, oh, wow, someone else has picked up this ball and run with it. And then I clicked through to the actual Magic Online listings and, oh, no surprises here. This actually just is who Crusherbot is in real life.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say more than what we said about this deck last week. I don't get it, but I think I'm forced to respect it. The one thing I'll note is that I kind of have been meaning to talk about Cathar Commando in the sideboard over Seal of Cleansing. Crusherbot is still on Seal of Cleansing, but I just want to mention that I think Cathar Commando, especially if you're Lurrusing, is like a really big upgrade to that slot. Really, that slot is for the mirror as the piece of disruption you want, and you can recur it with Lurrus. But the fact that you can play a card that is both like a body to put your equipment on and also your Seal of Cleansing and also still Lurrusable is like really, really big.
That card is so nice against Blue-White too, as a pretty beefy flash threat that can apply some pressure and then just kill a Chalice, kill a Spreading Seas or whatever on its way out the door.
Yeah, we're just here, being like, yeah, you know what? Blade of the Sixth Pride with Flash, Azorius has no chance against that one.
We were going wild over Endurance just as a Warfare Avenger a few weeks ago, so just doubling down on that theme. I will note, actually, that some of the Hammer lists at the face opens had Lurrus, but they had a non-Lurrusable pivot threat against Azorius in a Gideon Ally of Zendikar, which, if you think that none of the 2 drops or lower are high impact enough in those longer games against Blue-White, and you're willing to make that sacrifice, maybe even board in the Lurrus as part of this plan, then if you want to go bigger, then there's a lot of options to choose from, and Gideon is a pretty appealing one. Like I don't think the Blue-White decks with Prismatic Ending, but without that 4th land, like the random breeding pool or whatever, they can't actually kill the card. And so once it resolves, it's just a recurring stream of threats, and then just a decent threat itself if you're not scared of Solitude.
Maybe that's why they need the Shark Typhoons, They just gotta battle down.
Sure.
Yeah, the point, I like your point about not activating it into Solitude, is I assume what you were referring to, and just like stream of 2/2s into their face until they die. But
I vaguely recall the original Gideon Jura. There was some Blue-White mirror at like Nationals 10 years ago or whatever, where I saw a pair of Gideons, each of which had like 20-something loyalty, because they were just +2'd every turn, but they could never animate themselves because they would just be walking straight into the path of exiles in their opponent's deck that had no other valid targets otherwise. And so they were just sitting there staring at each other across the table and, until something had to change.
Wonderful design. First Gideon perfect card. They never changed. Oh, God. It was so bad.
And
anyways,
flawless segue. Speaking of more perfect designs, I guess we have some more results to get to here. And I think the most exciting aspect of any of these results has to be our 32second place finisher here in the Sunday Challenge.
Let me scroll all the way down to that, because I kind of gone through and been like, yeah, most of this stuff's the same. I'd seen Belfie back on their alternate living end nonsense, but 32nd place we have the return of Susurrus
He's
MTG
back, baby.
on This is back again with this. This is the Tron Prison deck. I think he top 32 to another challenge with a couple months ago now.
I would love it if that was also exactly 32nd place, just keeping his name out there as minimally as possible.
Yeah, I don't think it was a fine finish, but it wasn't like a top 8 or anything like that. Yeah, I don't really know. We haven't seen a lot of this deck. We haven't seen a lot of Tron lands mixed with Ensnaring Bridge recently. Ensnaring Bridge has not been around a lot recently, and I think that has to do with Prismatic ending a lot. Yeah,
that card has really not aged well. It is weirdly good in game 1 scenarios against Is It Motide. It's really hard for them to beat that card in game 1 for the most part. And you do have ways to defend it. Welding Jar with Ensnaring Bridge is a traditional lock against a lot of opponents. We got Spellsky here to double down on that. Sometimes you just double up on the bridge directly with the help of Khan the Great Creator and so on and so forth. But yeah, interesting deck, and very excited to see Cerberus back on his nonsense, as you put it. And we've been spoiled by Rifo Tapper streaming and some other great content recently, but all I want is to log onto Twitch someday and see Prison Mike having some fun.
Yeah, those were some good old days. We can reminisce on those. I do want to give a shout out for Jabberwocky showing up here. Shows up to the MOCS, has a terrible Saturday, logs back on Sunday, gets third in the challenge. Back to business. Nothing has changed.
If you're doing well, you've got momentum, you've got the fire, you just want to play more Magic, you butt out of a tournament, you need redemption, so you play more Magic. So we end up at the same conclusion either way.
Yeah, the only thing that gets you to stop playing Magic is, well, I would say a bunch of 10-5s, but Cedric is still playing these days, so I guess nothing will ever stop anybody.
Well, the only thing that's going to stop us is an ad break for a brief moment, but we'll be back, don't worry.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than selling to StarCityGames.com. With a 30% store credit trade-in bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry, there's no reason to sell to anyone else. Visit StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for details on all 4 of our great ways to turn your cards into cash or credit. Check out our buy list to sell specific cards, ship your cards to us for an offer with our ship and sell program, schedule an appointment with us at Star City Comics and Games in Roanoke, Virginia for the classic experience of selling to a person, or if you are a store or have over 500,000 cards to sell to us, we can come to you. Visit StarCityGames.com/sell for more details on your preferred way to sell your cards, and let us make it the easiest and best experience selling Magic the Gathering cards that you have ever had.
Okay, so let's get into what, in theory, is meant to be the meat of this episode, and that is the Innistrad Crimson Vow previews. And I will leave it to you to start with your pick of the semi-possible playable cards from this set.
Yeah, so this is Concealing Curtains. This is a card that I wrote most of an article about. I really like this card. It is black for an 0/4 defender, and you can pay 2 and a black at sorcerer speed to transform it into Revealing Eye, which is a 3/4 menace. And when you transform it, you look at your opponent's hand, you may choose a card. If you do, they discard that card and draw a card. So it's kind of like in the Thought-Knot Seer Vendilion Click realm. And the thing that kind of got me going on this card, because I don't think either, like, the rates and all this stuff, it's not like the most exciting thing, but it is something that's in the Lurrus range, which is pretty nice. And like, I think this card is like just on the right range of power level to like show up as like a little bit of a high end plan for Lurrus decks. Just so that maybe like you're not all in on Kroxa as your expensive threat and just like really exposed to graveyard hate.
Also, this card is so big. Like, actual Kraken Hatchling in a format with Ragavan and Goblin Guide and so on, like, actually does a surprising amount of good work. And then once you flip this thing, it's a 3/4, that's still very good sizing. You can flip it through an opposing Lightning Bolt, which not as relevant these days with Unholy Heat still being the default there, but you still see a decent amount of Lightning Bolts around. So I think the stats here, surprisingly, are priced to move as well.
Yeah, the 4th toughness is actually really, really clutch because, like, the nightmare scenario when you're on the draw with a creature in your hand is always they go Ragavan into Wrenn and 6. And this is just like, okay, I'll block. What are you doing? You can't ping this. Here's an 0/4. Good luck. So yeah, I'm pretty big on this card. In, again, small quantities. I don't think you're like building a whole deck around it necessarily, but who knows? Maybe you're going to see some like mono black Reanimator or like mono black Eldrazi nonsense where this card is playing a pretty key role as like an important one drop.
Yeah, let's go on to the Planeswalkers that we know of now. So we have a new Sorin and a new Chandra, and I think the summary of both of these is they are costed to not be too obnoxious in Standard, continuing this theme in recent Standard formats of Planeswalkers not really being anywhere or anywhere near as format defining as they have been in the past. And so these ones are not really going to get there in the Standard context, I think, and certainly not going to get there in Modern.
Yeah, I think that there's a chance that Sorin is like the highest value. Like, if you are like, I would like specifically a Planeswalker to pressure a sort of controlling opponent with, I think Sorin might be like the most effective card in mono black at that cost to do it. But like, it's, you know, we mentioned Gideon. This card is so far behind Gideon in terms of doing that. It's the kind of thing where like, I question if that's even the role you want it playing.
Yeah, and then the Chandra has a lot of text and none of it does anything. So we can move swiftly on to Voice of the Blessed. So this is white, and it's a Johnny's Pridemate, essentially, but we've got an additional little rider on this one too.
Yeah, so it's whenever you have 4 or more counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance. Whenever you have 10 or more, it has Indestructible. The part that kind of interested me here is that the white in the cost kind of lines up nicely if you're trying to go down the like mono white Pridemate Heliod route.
Yeah, that was my exact thought too, and it's almost like this whole subquest of, well, if it gets big enough, then it gains evasion. That is very welcome, especially in a format where the ground can get quite gummed up sometimes, and you know, it feels so futile to build your own big Ajani's Pridemate only to see that one chomp blocked by a young wolf or something. But yeah, the double white pips set up those Heliod curves so perfectly. And so that Soul Sisters Heliod list that we mentioned a while back, where you're trying to curve like Soul Warden into some kind of Pridemate into Heliod, and you've got Collected Company, you know, the ability to company into 2 white pips here and maybe 2 more white pips, and suddenly your Heliod is activated, or you get this and a Heliod, and now you have this just 5 power indestructible blocker out of nowhere. I think all of that goes a long way.
Yeah, I would note that I wouldn't necessarily want this deck to be true mono white, because I'm still kind of excited about the prospect of like making it yet another prismatic ending deck. And you definitely need a second color of mana for that, but this card certainly helps with like the mono white payoff side of things.
Yeah, so this one is, I think I'm maybe more optimistic about Voice of the Blessed than many of the other cards on this list, which is weird to say, but I think that it's easy to identify the home that it might go in, and you know it's going to be good there, which sadly is more than we can say for a lot of these.
Yeah, and it's just like another redundant copy of a already efficient and effective threat that you would kind of want in the format anyways.
What did you have next up here?
I had Path of Peril. This is 1 black, destroy all creatures with 2 mana value or less. And then you can cleave it to destroy all creatures for 4 white-black. I just kind of like looked at this and was kind of like, oh, this like destroys every creature in a Lurrus deck for 3 mana, which is like not horrible. I mean, we've come a long way from Bonchu's Last Reckoning, and I think this is like slightly worth noting there. I don't know if it's better than like a Flaying Tendrils or just going all the way up to Damnation if you're looking for that effect, but it's just another card in that kind of 3 mana destroy all creatures range that is like always worth thinking about, like, well, what are all the legal options?
Yeah, I know that we all got quite excited about Culling Ritual for a hot minute during the Strixhaven preview season, and that one didn't really go anywhere. This one is, I think, being cheaper is a big deal. You know, that's why you end up going here over the Damnations of the world. And I could imagine, you know, you're against Hammer, for example. This one cleans up everything, and it does it at just the last minute where maybe you still get to participate in the game. So, yeah, I think I'm higher on this one.
Yep. Next up, I had Hallowed Haunting Down. This is the 2 white enchantment. Whenever you play an enchantment spell, make a spirit token that has power and toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. And then there's like some rider text about like, if you have 4 or more spirits, they all have like flying and vigilance, or 7. It's 7 or more enchantments, something crazy like that. But I was just kind of like thinking through alternate win conditions for Enchantress that don't involve it going like full on crazy combo, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I kind of think once you get to that point, this versus Sigil of the Empty Throne or any other, big dumb idiot equivalent for Enchantress. I don't think those differences matter too much at that point.
Yeah, I mean, 4 mana versus 5 is like a slight upgrade, but yeah, it's kind of in that range of like replaceable endgame finisher.
Yeah, let's talk about Ascendant Pack Leader. So this is a card that I'm writing about for my column this week, mostly in a standard context with Historic and Pioneer as a stretch goal. Don't see this one making it into Modern, but let's talk about it. So this is a green 2/1, Jungle Lion, but Jungle Lion has glowed up a lot in recent years, and so this one enters with a +1/+1 counter if you control a permanent with mana value 4 or greater, and then when you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So that's kind of a tough frustration to me in some regards in Modern. At the same time, you have a bunch of free spells but technically cost 4 or more, or I saw people mentioning like ley lines in conjunction with this, where your Leyline of the Void is already kicking your opponent squarely in the teeth, and now you have a 1 mana 3/2 to make sure they have less time to draw their answer.
Yeah, my only problem with this is like the amount of work you have to put into it to make it better than Wild Nacatl is so high, and then the amount of work you have to put into Wild Nacatl has just fallen so far with Ragran Triome that like I really wonder like how many Wild Nacatls you see in these days.
Right, and I think it runs into the broader issue with any aggro deck or any like tribal deck, where it's you can put a bunch of power on the board and it just doesn't matter. Like you need to be putting so much power out there so fast if that is the only thing that you're doing in the game. And the successful tribal decks, of which we really haven't seen that many recently, are the ones where the creatures are all doing something else. So this was always the recipe with humans, right? Is you have Thalia and you have Reflector Mage and all of these effects stapled onto stuff that applies pressure. But if all you're doing is going like Pack Leader into Werewolf Pack Leader into Seal Leaf Champion, maybe that's a good curve for Pioneer or Historic, but in Modern, your creatures need to do things. Just trying to curve out like that simply isn't good enough.
Yeah, and you said power. I would also just like to note toughness, because like Fury is going to be the thing here. Like if you made that curve, you would just lose your first 2 turns to a free Fury and you'd just be like, oh, well, that was cool. Starting over. Hope I don't die. It's just you have to ask a lot of generic small creatures these days.
Yeah. Speaking of humans being dead, what's the next one up here?
We got Hamlet Vanguard. This is 2 in green for a Ward 2/1/1 that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters for each other non-token human you control. I only mentioned this because it neatly is a giant doofus that you can Imperial Recruiter for.
Okay. Yeah, it's in that interesting space of, in practice, it's going to have a boatload of power if things are going according to plan, but for the effects that look for specific power and toughness, it kind of falls into their orbit. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting card there. The competition at the 3-drop slot is so tough for the humans decks, even in recent sets. You have Adeline and a bunch of these other cool options that just a stat monster, once again, doesn't really get the job done. But the Ward 2 does go a long way here, I think, where, yeah, if they have a bunch of Unholy Heats and so on, they can shoot down your other stuff, and then the Hamlet Vanguard is smaller. But I do like that this kind of forces their attention elsewhere, and then if you have enough just random stuff lying around, it's still going to be pretty big, and it's going to get some work done.
Yeah, and I think that you kind of highlighted the thing here where, like, if they're firing off Unholy Heats on your other small creatures, it's not the worst thing for you. Whereas if they like are holding their Unholy Heats to try and trade for your 3-drops, and your 3-drop is just this, they're just gonna be like, that probably has 7 toughness. I can't throw 2 burn spells at that, and that's just gonna be it.
Yeah, let's talk about Inspired Idea. So this is a 2 and a blue for a draw 3 with Cleave, where if you don't pay the Cleave cost, which is 3 blue, your maximum hand size is reduced by 3. So this is effectively Ideas Unbound a lot of the time, and I love an Ideas Unbound.
Yeah, no, I do too, and that was kind of why I highlighted this card. I think I had highlighted Ingenious Mastery around the time of Strixhaven for a similar role. I think that one of the problems that a lot of these combo decks, like we've talked about the problems with combo, I think that if you are playing a combo deck and want to load up an interaction, one of the ways you can kind of get around that is by comboing through these large card draw spells. And I think this is a decent one in the sense that, like, it's efficient enough to cast on a combo turn, especially if you're like brawling it out. But like the kicker mode allows you to build a more interactive combo deck where like you trade off some cards, you play a draw 3, you can play full retail value if you're concerned about hand size, if you're just like playing slow and going long. I don't think it's great, but it's something that you should like float around in your head as a way to potentially rebuild the Storm decks.
Worth noting that restriction is cumulative as well. So you cast 2 of these, your maximum hand size is now 1, and that's going to be pretty limiting potentially going forward. So I think you do have to either maybe run this in very small numbers, where if you have if you have a deck that is very capable of unloading its hand quickly, so in the old days this would be some wacky Mox Opal deck or something, but if you just have a bunch of 0s and 1s, then 1 or 2 copies of this just to refuel, I could see being good. But yeah, if you're trying to, or if you're going off in 1 turn, like you say, and you don't plan to make it to the cleanup step where you're caring about your hand size restriction. Otherwise, though, I don't see this one really having a home. Let's finish this first batch of previews with House of Horrible Dolls, which is clearly the peanut gallery is not a fan of this one.
No. Just in the last couple days, the puppy has discovered looking out the window and getting mad about things. So that's, I guess, he did that at 7 a.m. this morning, and he's back around for another round. But back to Magic cards. House of Horrible Dolls is, it might sound familiar. It's kind of a God Pharaoh's Gift. It's a 5-mana artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it and exile a creature in your graveyard at sorcery speed to make a copy of that creature, except for that copy is a construct, so plus 0/0 with power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts you control that has haste. And the copy is also an artifact, I believe.
Yeah, so I love this card, but I don't see how I can put it in a modern deck. And honestly, that is the elevator pitch for the set, is a bunch of sweet designs, and maybe they'll crack into some of the smaller formats, but just are not where they need to be on rate or on something else to make it into modern. But if you did have to build a deck around this card, which, hey, you don't have to, but it sounds like a fun time, where would you start with this?
I don't quite know. The fact that it was like a 5-mana artifact that was making more artifacts was interesting to me. Maybe Goblin Engineer gets involved was kind of the card I was thinking of.
Okay. I was thinking maybe, can you build some weird control deck where like you have a bunch of the pitch elementals, and so once you build up to this, you're just recurring like a Solitude or a Fury or something every turn, or hey, well, why don't we just go back to the Moldrifter well? That's proven successful in the past. That's
kind of adorable. I don't think casting this for 5 mana and then starting to activate it after the fact is like totally out of range. So maybe in like a world where planeswalkers are kind of vulnerable, but artifacts aren't, which is a very real world in the format of Unholy Heat. You could see this as a high-end finisher for a lot of these kind of Fury Solitude decks.
Yeah, yet another card that makes me wish Phyrexian Tower existed in this format, but I'll have some time to dwell on that as we take another short break here.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
All right, let's open up this second batch of previews with Cemetery Prowler. I saw, was this the card that you've shotgunned for this week?
No, that was not me.
Okay. This is a Brian Gottlieb jam, which I know he's going to go deep down some rabbit holes here, but we should maybe do that too.
Yeah, so this is the 1 green 3/4 Vigilance. And when it enters a battlefield or attacks, you exile a card from a graveyard, and then spells you cast cost 1 less for each card type they share with cards exiled by Cemetery Prowler. I think on the surface level, this card is like sort of in range if we were in a more tutor heavy format, but I don't think we really are in the Quarter Calling days.
I did survive the brief semblance Anvil craze of early 2019, and it was understandably very brief, and so this is kind of taking me back to those days. I don't know. I'm trying to think about what I would do with this card and like exactly which card types it would pair the best with, and so I'm having visions of my Manamorphoses, all now start to cost 1 mana, or can I like, if I exile a creature, can I go off with a bunch of colorless 1-drops or something? I don't think I can do any of that, but even if I could, I think whatever deck that looks like is going to be just spinning its tires and doing nothing when it can't stick a Cemetery Prowler.
Yeah, I mean, I respect that this is a semblance Anvil with power and toughness. That's like always a nice thing to have, but I guess it's not even a full semblance Anvil. I like I said, I think this is a card for a Court of Calling deck from a different era.
So let's say I cast Incubation Incongruity. I find this, I then cast this, and I exile that split card. Do I now have a discount on both my instants and my sorceries?
Yes, you do.
Okay, well that maybe gets me somewhere, except I've jumped through a lot of hoops to get a slightly bigger Baral, which I don't know why I put all this work in the first place. In my green deck,
you also played a like creature-specific cantrip, and then are like, I'm going to cast instants and sorceries.
Okay, so scratch that. We'll come up with a new plan here.
Artifacts and creatures are 2 types. Or maybe we should talk about a different nonsense card of Dreadful Service. This is a 2 and a black enchantment. When you discard a card, make a 2/2 zombie. This only triggers once a turn.
Yeah, so I don't think it's too difficult to get to the point where you are triggering this and it's free. It's not gated by a mana cost in the same way that Drakehaven is, for example, even though that one, in theory, can go off as many times as it likes. I think you can easily set up some kind of Rube Goldberg machine where you are triggering this on both your turn and the opponent's turn in each turn cycle. And so every turn you're getting a free 2/2. My question is like, why though? Is that worth it? I could see it being good against exactly blue-eye control, and although against anyone else, I don't think that matters.
I can imagine you ending up in a spot with like cookbooks where you're trying to convert your daredevils into resources in a way that is like not gated by like creatures going through your graveyard or something. It's kind of like a weirdo corner case card for a deck like that, where your discard is not producing anything significantly like aggressive. It's just like buying you a bunch of arbitrary control resources, and this is like a thing that also lets you convert that into a winning position.
Could this be some weird sideboard pivot for Living End?
Maybe. I think my problem with that is that a lot of the things that by the time you resolve this card, like you could just like untap and cast a 4/4 flyer the next turn instead of cycling something.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. It is cute that you get to cast this and then cycle Street Wraith and immediately get some kind of payback there. But if you were able to play like 28 Street Wraiths, then you would have my interest. But as it is, limited on that front, so I don't see this one going anywhere.
Yeah, also you would have to have black mana in your deck, which is like not something most of the Living End decks are interested in these days.
Hey, we got the one Sunken Ruins.
Okay, yeah, that's good. We could put a fetch land that, a Watery Grave in our deck or whatever.
All right, let's move on to a Jolly Green Giant.
Yeah, this is a Cultivator Colossus. This is a 4 green star trample, power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. You may recognize this as Malamo Maro Sorcerer and wonder why I'm discussing this card right now. And that is because of the last ability on it, which is when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. And this is basically just another math puzzle for Amulet players to solve, I think. If you have 36 lands in your deck, how many cards do you filter through? But I think the real question is like, if you cast this card and make like a 10/10, what happens when they kill it and you untap with all spells in your hand and however many lands? Like, is that good?
Important PSA here for the amulet context. This does not go infinite with a bounce land. We have thought about that. We have then thought about how that would work in practice and concluded that is not legal. If you try to do that, then we will have some stern words from some judges before too long.
Yeah, so the reason that doesn't work is the same reason that when you resolve ad nauseum, your opponent can't respond in between each flip. It's just all resolving as like a long chain of repetitions within the same trigger, and then all the other triggers won't go onto the stack until the next time that they're like the stack has things being able to be put on it.
Yeah, this is going to be an incredibly satisfying card to cast in, EDH or other formats. But yeah, given the lack of some weird convoluted infinite combo setup, I guess this one wouldn't be too convoluted. It's just 2 cards, and some of those you're happy to play anyway. But regardless, I don't think this one sadly has what it takes. Let's talk about Change of Fortune here, which is a riff on the much loved, at least by you and me, Dream Salvage. So this is 3 in a red. You discard your hand, and then you draw cards equal to the total number of cards you have discarded this turn. So this is, Windfall with aspirations to be something more.
Yeah, I mean, Tolarian Winds is obviously way too good for Modern. I wonder if this is a way for a deck that is not like a dedicated dredge deck to just one-shot dredge its library.
Okay, so are you thinking just when you cast this, that by itself is going to get you there? Or do you need to be, I guess, maybe cycling a Street Wraith or something in advance of that?
You could do a bit of it all. I haven't really thought through like how you're going to do something before this, but maybe like the Bergie combo deck just cast this and the game ends.
You have to be more specific about which Bergie combo deck here.
Good question. I'll just leave it at my original statement and let that interpretation fall on the reader.
Okay. Yes. So some homework out there for everyone trying to break this card. We have Demonic Bargain as well here. So I think this is actually a callback to Witty Demon, one of the fate cards from the Mystery Booster product. So this is 2 in a black. You exile the top 13 cards of your library, and then you get to search for a card and put it into your hand.
That's pretty adorable. So this is just like basically 3 mana tutor in the same way that Demonic Consultation was basically 1 mana tutor.
Yeah. The obvious tension here is if you have a tutor target in your deck, like a one-off, which is situational, or in a combo deck, it's the one card which you find at the end of your chain to win the game, there is a chance that you just lose that card and now have to figure it out from there. So not good in that context of, the tutors are often useful. But if it's your deck with all 4s and you just need a cheap way to get redundancy on one of those 4s, then I could see this being good there.
Yeah, the actual odds of you flipping, like, if you're casting this to find a 4 of in like let's say you've drawn like 10, your opening hand and like 3 or 4 more cards, and you haven't found your Goblin Charbelcher, and you cast this, you're going to find a Charbelcher 99.7% of the time. And then those other 3 out of 1,000 times, you will have exiled all 4 and have to figure out the rest of your life. But, that's a good story equity to have occur to you.
Yeah, so at first glance, you would think if Grim Tutor has not seen play in Modern after its reprint, then why would this one? I think the answer there is, firstly, the mana requirement, where Grim Tutor is double black, and then also it's 2 life, and if you're trying to get double black, if that's not convenient for your deck as it is, then maybe you're taking some pain off fetch lands and shock lands to set that up. So it is actually a pretty steep cost. And that splash ability maybe gives it potential in decks which normally would not have that otherwise. So if your Storm deck, for example, if you have this light touch of black and then you have Manamorphose as well, you're reducing its cost with Baral or something, then maybe this gives you like more actual deterministic wins in a way that the other options simply don't.
Yeah, I think that the other part of the equation is, you mentioned the splash. Like, I think it's pretty easy to put, like, we talk about Belcher. It's pretty easy to put Manamorphose and like Aghavim's Awakening into your deck for this, because people are already playing Seagate's Restoration. What the card Shaheen was really excited about, and that has done nothing besides tap for blue mana.
Mostly in combo decks, yeah. I wonder if Mashmalovsky, our ad nauseum enthusiast who often shows up in these challenges and who will show up again before this episode is done, I wonder if they would have some interest in this for ad nauseum. I guess Profane Shooter already is occupying a lot of that space.
Well, I don't know if you can play Profane Tutor into Fairy Chalice, the format. That might be the problem.
I don't know if you can
need to find an alternate plan.
I don't know if you can play a Lotus Bloom combo deck in that format either. And I guess Masmanovsky has found a different plan, not to give the game away too much just yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is, if your deck is going to play 4 Thassa's Oracle, this is fine at setting up the backup combos with that card, right? So,
yeah, and maybe sometimes you just like draw a bunch of these and just manually mill your deck to set up a Thassa's Oracle. But I think that
you
might
can
be
chain, right? You can just like cast this to find the next one.
Well, unless okay, so you end up kind of riding the wave here, where once you're 2 demonic bargains in, there's a decent chance that you've exiled the 3rd one by this point, and so you're kind of up the creek without a paddle, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. How does
math time? Jarvis, save us.
It's weird. It's kind of like what. You know what? It's fine. We'll figure this out off the air. This is not a we'll do it live kind of math situation. Let's talk about the next card. And we kind of mentioned a deck this might fit in earlier. This is Massive Might, and this is, I think, the most efficient trample pump spell for Infect. It's just green +2/+2 and trample. I don't know how much, it's an instant speed, obviously. I don't know how much better this is than Rancor, but like, I know that the pump spells have definitely exceeded the expectations of Rancor just by like fighting instant speed damage spells. So maybe this shows up in those decks. Yeah,
boosting any creature over a baseline Unholy Heat is pretty appealing. Likewise for just any of the kind of small ball removal. So yeah, I'm not an Infect expert, but I could see it playing that role in some numbers for sure.
Yeah, very small numbers. Another card we might want to discuss in small numbers that also costs 1 is Dreadfugue. Black mana, sorcery, target player reveals their hand and discards a card with mana value 2 or less. Cleave for 2 and a black to make it a full-on coercion.
Yeah, this is by some margin, I think, the most generically good card from this set, but I don't know how good it is in a format where we've mentioned black cards as a whole are kind of suffering a bit, and you have Thoughtseize and Inquisition already competing with this. In a modern specific context, I think the difference between 2 and 3 is pretty big right now. So firstly, against a Cascade decks, like that is the whole ball game, right? But then you have stuff like Teferi Time Raveler or Dreadfugue. So there's always been this tension with this kind of stuff against the Lurrus decks, where is by definition good against everything that isn't Lurrus, but then Lurrus is so good at recovering from these effects that you really want to be able to hit that too.
Yeah, I think I specifically wanted to put this card on this list to call out how much worse it is than Inquisition. It is not like 3 mana matters in this format. I would not put Dreadfugue into any modern deck over Inquisition at this point. I think if you are having that discussion, you should be wondering if you're supposed to go all the way to Duress.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be the natural follow-up is there a deck that wants more than 8 1-mana discard spells? I guess like the rack decks or whatever, but then they have their own funky requirements. So yeah, I don't see a home for this one here, but I guess specifically Pioneer, where you don't have Inquisition, but you do want more Thoughtseizers, like this would be a perfect home for.
Yeah, I think that this card is like a slam dunk for Pioneer and probably pretty good in Historic. Historic's not like really a 3-drop format, but I would keep away from it in Modern. I think we have one last card here that is down to discuss, and that's Voldaren Estate. This is the vampire like sliver hive, I guess is the only way to describe it.
Yes.
It's a land. It taps for a colorless. It taps and you pay a life for a mana of any color to cast vampires, and you can pay 5 minus the number of vampires you control and tap it to make a blood token. It's worth noting, like, I like these upside tribal lands for specific tribes. Like, like unclaimed territory is a baseline. This is probably about at the same baseline. Like it's probably the kind of thing where you probably play like 2 of this and 2 unclaimed territory if you're into vampires.
Yeah, I guess if you're into vampires, what does that look like? Is it a bunch of the like madness adjacent stuff that we had in Shadow's block? Is it even like the white vampires from Ixalan block? Is it just generic vampire beatdown deck, which likely is going to have other pressures on its life total and doesn't really want to be dinging itself each time? I guess that's part of the issue with vampires is they don't have a coherent identity to work towards yet. And so you have some specific cards or interactions which are appealing. So like Sorin just as a card and like with Bloodghast and so on. That's pretty cool. But beyond that, I don't know what our vampire deck is really hoping for here.
Well, I think that might just be a whole future episode in itself, is going over the tribes of Innistrad, as opposed to trying to figure out a vampire deck on the fly here. I do agree with you that I think Sorin is the single best vampire card ever. Like it is, more than just like Modern. I think it's going to take a lot to surpass that one. Maybe we can have the discussion if Sorin is like really a vampire card or if it's just like show and tell with a secret line of text on it. But that sounds like a thing for another time. I think it's just worth noting that Voldaren Estate and like cards like it are the kinds of things that should make you like, go over the Modern list of cards and then like look at Fury and then look back at the list of cards you found and like make some tough life choices.
Yeah, this might be a good segue into touching on blood tokens quickly, because this is a new set specific mechanic which is tying into all of the vampire stuff going on. So this is a new type of token. This is you get to I'm trying to summon up the exact wording here, so bail me out if you you have it on the tip of your tongue.
It's a clue token, but it costs 1 to activate, and you loot instead of drawing a card.
Oh, do you loot or do you rummage?
Sorry, I might have had that backwards. Is it loot or rummage? We should double check that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's
this
rummage.
Is actually like a big deal from. That's like an actual big deal for Modern, is rummage versus loot, because it is actually better in Modern, I think, if you're rummaging. If you're generating like an arbitrary unit of dredge on the spot, as opposed to like an arbitrary unit of like dredging after you've already set up, that's like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, there is like one family of graveyard combo decks that really wants to be looting instead of rummaging, and then you have anything that's going hard on dredge. Yeah, anything going hard on dredge that really wants to be doing the reverse. But I don't know. I don't think we've seen a card that makes blood tokens which is priced to move for any dredge shell that we've seen so far. So I more wanted to touch on just this as a concept, because I think one area where we maybe both called on MH2 as a set, like some of the nifty things it was doing, was all the stuff around like treasure tokens and clue tokens and food tokens, and then this crossover intersection of the 3 of those. Just that idea of here's a widget, and now you get to collect a bunch of widgets, and if you have all of these widgets with the same name, then something cool happens. What do you think about just that concept and how it's being implemented here?
I like it here because it feels like it's very mechanically tied to specifically vampires. I am kind of sick of like mono goober arbitrary card unit like themes. Decay was a nice bridge away from that, but like it feels like a lot of these, especially because we're here talking Modern in and out, a lot of these food, treasure, token, blood, clue, it's just like make an artifact. How good does a Darksteel Ingot go? And it's just like finding the most efficient ways to turn a Darksteel Ingot into like more than a Darksteel Ingot. I mean, we saw this with the Academy manufacture piles early on in the Modern Horizons 2 format, where you would just end up with like 47 game objects and like take some random actions. So like blood tokens are a good implementation of that, but like I would like a break. I'm good enough with the number of artifact tokens we have right now.
Yeah, these are either mock sapphires or they're nothing in contemporary Modern, it feels like. I guess it speaks to a larger confusion I have just about the set from a design standpoint, which is when you look over what we have of the file so far, there are so many ways to incidentally or explicitly hate on graveyards, but I'm not sure what graveyard. I'm not sure what bullshit is coming from the graveyard at this point. I'm not seeing anything there to be scared about.
I mean, you can cast these aura, like the fact that the disturb cards are auras in this set, but like also are like really expensive to flashback is really just what you're talking about, right? I think I'm just like kind of appreciating this set in the same way that like you can appreciate the like boarding school aspects of Strixhaven, and like this is Vampire Wedding, Werewolf Bar Mitzvah, whatever it is. And I, not thinking too hard about like the design flavor of it, if that makes sense. It's like kind of just like a fun thing to look at with some cool cards across it. And less like, is there like a cohesive plan for these Innistrad sets to use the graveyard? Because it doesn't feel like there is.
Yeah, I guess time is running out to introduce one of those if you have one in mind, unless there's a fourth visit queued up in the 5-year plan for a few years down the line.
Yeah, maybe the Dominaria sets are just going to be graveyard sets, and we're just going to get Odyssey 1 and like Odyssey -5, however the Brothers War works, which would be, I'd be totally down for that. But I do appreciate, like I said, I appreciate the like aesthetics of these Innistrad sets. They're like pretty on point. But yeah, you are right that the other ones kind of told a tighter thematic story.
Yeah, maybe I'm just looking at that with a more critical eye because I watched the Rissic Studies videos on like the continuity between the different types of horror at play in Innistrad this morning. But as always, a banger of a video, which I would recommend people check out. But translating that perspective over, it's like, I guess it is on point in a way for the cards in the set to be so fearful of non-existent horrors lurking within the graveyard that they're like going mad with that paranoia.
Yeah, that's a deep dive. I don't know what to say about it, but yeah, I don't really know. It is weird to have this much graveyard hate between the two sets, and I know limited players have specifically complained about like Diregraph Horde, like the common that just like is a Grave Titan that also exiles their graveyard. Like, why did this do all this stuff?
Well, you out there can ponder all of that as we regale you with another short ad break. Don't go anywhere.
With this break, I'd like to talk to you about Star City Games Premium. For years, StarCityGames.com has been hosting the best Magic the Gathering strategy content on the internet, and Star City Games Premium is a huge part of that. If you want to see great articles from Pro Tour champions, world champions, and many other accomplished players, as that content comes hot off the presses, subscribe to StarCityGames.com Premium. More than that, Star City Games Premium comes with a host of benefits when shopping at StarCityGames.com. Premium members save 5% on Magic the Gathering sealed product, 10% on singles, and 15% on supplies. There's even special benefits on SCG Tour Online event entries to keep an eye out for when those events come around. All that savings and all that content costs just $7.99 a month. For the price of 2 booster packs, you can be on the cutting edge of Magic the Gathering strategy, getting insights from the best in the industry on Star City Games Premium.
Okay, let's close this one out here with our nonsense of the week. And I see you have really done some overtime here. You've rustled up 5 separate nonsense candidates to sink our fangs into.
Yeah, the first one is like nonsense that highlights. I kind of love highlighting like random Strixhaven and AFR cards popping up. And the first deck is Goblins, which might make you think about Bogart Harbinger. No, this is just like red goblins. Like there's just a bunch of red lands and goblins and only 2 pile drivers because we are battlecry goblining our opponents here. Oh,
okay. Yeah, I kind of respect the urge not to try to set up some like pastiche of Splinter Twin on turn 3, and we're getting into combat. I got some big guys over here and some more big guys over here, and I do some quick math. Hopefully that's going to add up to 20 or more.
Yeah, I mean, you get Reckless Bushwhacker and Goblin Bushwhacker and like Goblin Bushwhacker version 47 or whatever it is right now. So yeah, I appreciate like what this deck is trying to do, even if, we did discuss this like whole Fury problem going on. This deck certainly has that in spades, but I like the cards that are showing up here, and a little bit of Burning Tree Emissary never made anyone's week any worse.
Yeah, that is the one non-goblin being a very conspicuous standout here in this list. So that's the monocolor-ish aggro deck. Let's move on now to a many-colored something or other.
Yeah, I think a few people have been pitching this week, and this is a 4-color. Well, I mean, it's, you know, a 4-color deck, but it's Songnath. This is Song of Creation. You going with the Solitudes and Furies and Omnaths of the world to kind of go off. We've seen a bit of this in context of like Dragon Rage Channeler, Underworld Breach stuff in the past, but now we're just like hybridizing it as like it's Risen Reef. And we're going to go off that way. So it's just really 80 good cards and Song of Creation, and then using Yorion with Song to it actually does a couple things, right? So like you can play Song and then pick up Yorion and go off from there. But also like when you play Yorion, you can flicker your Song and then it comes back after the discard your hand trigger, so you can keep all your stuff and then like untap and go off again. And then this is also a Berkey deck. It's doing a lot. Notable kill condition of casting Conflagrate. Pretty important when you're drawing your whole deck.
Maybe there's also some weird actual loop that I have no hope of figuring out in real time here, where you loop the 2 copies of Endurance, reshuffling themselves and also a bunch of other spells, and you can just do that over and over again, and maybe that's actually infinite somehow.
You'd have to probably have a very specific number of cards in your graveyard. Maybe there's a way to set that up. There might, I guess the order of your life. Yes, we'll just say yes for now and go from there.
And now we move on to a new experiment by Mash Malofsky, a well-known ad nauseum pilot. And I saw some screenshots of Angel's Grace being bugged, so maybe their hand was forced there and they had to get their fix somewhere else. But they are getting into some Gyruda gaming, and whatever you think of the other companions for Modern, you always have to see that.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of Gyruda Reanimator, I want to say earlier on in the format. This is the second time I think we've mentioned this Gyruda deck in Nonsense of the Week. But this time it's a little bit different, I think. This is still kind of shifting towards this idea of like not chaining off Gyrudas the way you did during the Companion era. Just like, I'm going to cast Gyruda. It hopefully puts in an Archon of Cruelty, but like maybe it puts in a Wormcoil Engine and we're good enough with that. The thing that was kind of cute here was that it also, again, uses the Cabal Coffers Urborg setup out of the mana base to really give you a sort of backup plan, but also just like a way to turbo into Gyruda naturally.
Since we discussed Coffers with Urborg in the MH2 preview season, this is not literally the first time we've seen it, but I think the one example we did have from months ago was just a version of this deck, so it effectively is. Yeah,
I agree with exactly that. I don't think I've seen it maybe one other time in some other similar nonsense deck. I do like that this deck is stretching to play Sakura Tri-Builder. I think you do need that non-black ramp somewhere in the deck, and then also like kind of bridging that to have some graveyard filler with Grizzly Salvage to kind of actually get your way to like the reanimate part of the deck, because you are a persist deck. But yeah, you're trying some stuff, you're doing some things. I appreciate the like very classic 4-pack rat in the sideboard. Like, are you really a mono black reanimator deck if you're not playing 4-pack rat?
Yeah, Pack Rat seems like such an inoffensive card by today's standards. One other 2-drop we see in the sideboard is Turak Dreadcantor. So this is the 1 and a black 2/1 with protection from white, and you can kick it for BB to get a hint to Torak, of course, and make them discard to at random. I've been meaning to bring out this card for a while, actually. I think this is a great response to the blue-white control decks, and maybe even the 4-color decks as well, where you see Hammer playing Knight of Malice of all cards, and this one is a lot better if you can kick it, which Hammer can't really, but if you are some kind of heavy black Lurrus deck, this card seems great to me. So you've got the protection from white, which makes it basically unkillable, aside from Supreme Verdict against blue-white, and it's on a big 4/3 body, so you're actually applying meaningful pressure. And the random discard, if it's kicked, is great against decks that need to line up their answers in a certain way. So I think every part of this card is what you're looking for there.
Yeah, and I kind of like the fact that you're kind of leaning into the, my deck is just a bunch of 6-drops that I'll just cast eventually with Torok here, as like, this is just like another big hammer I can throw at the Azorius deck, but I could also just like cut under them by playing this as a cheap creature. And it all just kind of plays to this plan of like forcing them to play ball, grinding away at their cards until like eventually some big giant idiot resolves.
Speaking of sideboard cards, I love the 4 Leyline of the Void, not just because that card is excellent in Modern right now against so many different decks, but also because in this deck, whether you count it as the 4-drop that it technically is, or the 0-drop that you want it to be in practice, either way, it's still compatible with Garuda.
Yeah, 4 and 0 are in fact even. And I actually don't think most of the other graveyard hate you could play that's like, you can't play any of the 1-mana ones, obviously. Like, I guess you could play Tormod's Crypt, but like, at that point, just Leyline and, be done with it.
So that's a very welcome taste of Garuda, and hopefully more on that before too long. What else do we have for now?
Yeah, so we are coming back around to yet another Mox Amber deck in the Nonsense of the Week. Does Mox Amber like automatically put you in contention for Nonsense of the Week? I feel like it has to at this point.
It is funny to look back on those days during the Dominaria preview season where we all thought the sky was falling with Mox Amber. And it turns out now that when you see Mox Amber in a deck, that deck is some fun and cool gimmick, which you don't actually have to be too worried about.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of higher hopes for this list because it feels like it's actually getting somewhere. So this is, pretty typical Urza stuff, Emery, Stoneforge Mystic, Urza, but some of those numbers are trimmed because we have a different cheaper legend in the form of Oswald Fiddlebender. This is yet again, I think maybe playing, actually, I might need to rewind. If Mox Amber might not be the only thing that gets you into Nonsense of the Week, it might just be playing with any Forgotten Realms cards at all that aren't Tasha's Hideous Laughter. That might get you into Nonsense of the Week. So this is the 1 and a white 2/2 Artificer Legend. It's like a dwarf or halfling or something, but you can pay a white and tap it to pot away an artifact. And this deck is not really trying to do anything crazy like untap it. You're just kind of flipping some stuff around for the right piece of hate in the way you would expect an artifact deck to work. So you've got your Soul Guide Lanterns at 1, your Ether Spellbombs at 1, just like the very typical Urza Saga suite. But moving up the curve, you do have Thopter combo, but you also have Damping Sphere, and then you can also get Lightning Greaves to really sort of set up this protection on your Oswald to, I guess, sort of flip through the chain a little bit more to, I don't really know. It feels like your chain kind of dead ends.
I know both of us did that deep dive into Scryfall, trying to find some kind of birthing pod style chain for Oswald, and we came up short. The cards just aren't there to make that work. I am a little surprised that unlike this user Contra Ego's previous dabbling in blue-white Urza, this is not a Yorion deck, because you would think an extra 20 cards means you can fit a lot of obscure situational Oswald targets.
Yeah, I mean, also, Yorion is a card that enables Mox Amber, so that's the big brain. You can even flicker the Mox Amber to get a mana on your end step. This is just thinking small. I do kind of wonder if there's not, like, some more specific Oswald change you want to generate, but the fact that I'm wondering that is probably a good sign because it implies that, like, I'm already interested in the concept of activating Oswald and I just want better things from it. I do love this Manamo really working overtime in the mana base. I don't know if Manamo has ever had like an all-time great moment, but I have to assume this deck is coming close.
Look, any appearance by those legendary lands is an all-time great moment for me. Even, or maybe especially, a Borrow, which has to be probably the best card in Saviors of Kamigawa.
I can't believe you said it's the only playable Saviors card. There's a Saviors card right in this deck's sideboard that should probably be in the main deck, and that's the Pithing Needle.
That's an Innistrad card, especially if you are an Arena Zoomer. Saviors can't claim sole ownership even of that one.
Yeah, that's true. It's a Ravnica and Innistrad and Saviors and Core set card because it was the only good card printed in that set across everything else.
Yeah, when they covered Saviors on the receivables, Pithing Needle was in contention for the award of what card in the set is most out of place. And to me, it's the clear winner there because it's actually a playable Magic card.
Yeah, it also has like an identifiable English, like the name is just like, not like you have to like research all of Japanese history and understand the mythology to understand like what is going on and why is like Nico Ona this Ona. Like, it's just, here's a Pithy Needle. You stab someone with it. You're like, okay. Yeah, Saviors is a real all-timer for if you really want to stump someone who is playing during that era, you just start naming cards from that set and asking them what they do, and you get some really fun answers. I played this game with Jarvis Yu, and he got, I think, somehow managed to get all of the Ona wrong, even getting to the last one in the cycle and being like, this is the white one. It's like, no, Jarvis, that's already happened.
It was kind of then to name it Pithy Needle instead of like Ayumi's Wand or something, so that it could actually get reprinted and escape the confines of maybe the worst set of all time.
Yeah, I think this is about literally the point that they started thinking about that, because the next set with new cards was Sacred Foundry, and they were very specific about like, we will like to print these, we want to be able to reprint these Shocklands on any set, except for that they just go back to Ravnica so often that we just get them there.
And on the subject of taking a beloved IP and milking it for as much as possible until it's an empty shell of its former self, that's week 1 of Innistrad Crimson Vow previews in the books. We'll be back next week with the rest of those and much more. Until then, I'm on Twitter at Domin Javier. He's there at ARMLX, and we will talk to all of you again next time. Take care.